Thank you, Chair. And I'd like to thank all my witnesses, all the witnesses for being here this afternoon on such a very important topic, not only for Canada, but for the U.S. as well. Ms. Brownhour, maybe I'll start off with you. You made a comment at the very end that if the world adopted our practices, we'd actually see emissions drop by 25%. How do we get that message across to fellow Canadians and Americans just on how good we are at doing this?
Well, we should do everything we can to get that message across. And Minister Savage will have heard me use that stat before, and I'm sure my Chief of Staff is tearing his hair out. He's heard me use it so many times. I think it bears repeating because it's so difficult, it seems, to be heard on that. And we are green leaders in Canada. We're amazing innovation leaders. It's miraculous, some of the true remediation that has been accomplished at sites, including in, of course, Minister Savage's province in the oil sands area. And it was that statistic that was first shared with us at an energy ministers conference. I believe it was a professor from the University of Calgary, and I glommed onto it immediately because of its positive repercussions for us globally.
You know, I find it really interesting because a lot of times it's environmentalists that are putting the pressure on to see that when we look at the displacement of this oil, it actually gets replaced by something else. And Ms. Savage, you talked about this a little bit in regards to propane. You said that if we don't have this pipeline operating, you know, to replace it and put it on rail just doesn't make sense. Like if you look at us in Saskatchewan, for example, we like to ship grain by train and oil by pipelines. That makes a lot of sense. So Ms. Savage, when you made that comment about propane, how do you see that impacting into the emissions targets that we're trying to reach? And how does it impact in regards to the world as a global network if we're starting to see propane coming from other parts of the world instead of coming out of Alberta and Saskatchewan?
I think we know that we produce our energy at the highest environmental standards, and I'll talk a little bit about some of the areas where we have actually led by many years the United States. In fact, in Alberta, we were the first jurisdiction in North America to put a price on carbon, and we did that over a decade ago in 2007 with our heavy emitters levy on carbon. We have methane emission regulations where we're reducing methane emissions by 45% by 2025. We're ahead of the United States. They're actually looking to Canada. They're looking to Alberta on how do we do this? How do we reduce our emissions like Canada has, like Alberta has? So the one thing we know for sure, when you need energy and you can't source it from your most reliable, trusted sources for a supplier, you're going to get it from somewhere else. So as I said earlier, it would probably mean they need to get propane from the U.S. Gulf states, or it needs to be sources for refining and preparing it would have to come by rail or by truck, and of course that increases emissions.
So, Mr. Walker, how does Ontario feel in regards to having their fate of the Sarnia region and the auto industry in the hands of a court in the U.S.? Isn't that a little bit more concerning? And doesn't that maybe bode well for an argument to actually have an all-Canadian pipeline somewhere in the future?
Very concerned, Mr. Hoback, and to all members of the committee. This is very daunting from an economic, from an environmental, from an energy security. All of our lives will be drastically impacted, on both sides of the border, frankly. This is going to have huge impact to my colleague, MPP Bob Bailey in Sarnia and surrounding area, but all the way through, from Alberta, through Ontario, through Quebec into the Maritimes. This is drastically going to impact all of us. Ontario definitely wants to have a Team Canada approach to ensure that we have a reliable, safe form of energy that's affordable. We're all going to be suffering, as we all are now, through COVID-19. We need the economic recovery to kick into gear, to give people some relief. And this is going to play an absolutely critical part. Agriculture, construction, all industry, frankly, every group in the province is going to be impacted. Our hospitals, our long-term care facilities, everybody's impacted.
You talked about the 125,000 jobs in that. When we go back to a certain that bottleneck, where does it go? What's the consequences of that?
Well, we've been there before, and we know what happens when you don't have enough pipeline capacity to move your production. And Alberta was in that place in 2018, 2019, because we didn't have pipelines built on time. Northern Gateway was vetoed, Energy East was shut down. And what happens when you don't have enough pipeline capacity to move your product is you blow out the differentials. You're selling your product at a price discount. And in Alberta, what that led to was curtailment. Production quotas that the government had to put in place to manage production in a very, very unusual way, that in the same sort of way that OPEC countries do. So when you're managing production and you're curtailing it, you're not letting the free market move properly. It leads to loss of jobs. It leads to lower prices. It leads to a lack of investment, and it disrupts the whole way that an economy is supposed to run. So not having a way to move 400,000 barrels of oil on a pipeline is very detrimental to Alberta. We've been there. It would potentially move by rail at a higher environmental footprint, or we would be back in a situation where we would have to curtail production.
Thank you, Mr. Hoback. Thank you for that.